Welcome to Control and Velocity, platform governance that accelerates teams. I'm Jim Crowley, a solutions architect here at CircleCI, and I'm joined by my colleague Eddie Webanero, our director of field engineering. Over the next 80 minutes, we're going to tackle one of the biggest lies in DevOps, that you have to choose between control and speed. And spoiler alert, you don't. So let's get into it. Let me just quickly introduce myself. Like I said, I'm a solutions architect here at CircleCI, which means I spend my days helping Fortune 500 companies figure out their CI/CD transformations. Before this, I was at IBM, so I've seen enterprise complexity from both sides. When I'm not automating everything in sight, you'll find me on the local hiking trails or in my garage working on my DIY projects. We're just going to do a quick engagement here to drop in chat. To make sure everything's working, and make sure when we kind of going through this presentation, we'll have a couple of different activities, whether it's poll questions or kind of engagements in the chat. Make sure to use the chat functionality just to throw your responses in, and then when we get to the end or you have a question, use the Q&A functionality. But let me hear from you where you guys are dialing in from today. What's your current role at your current company? Platform engineer, engineering manager, DevOps. Let's see who's in the room here. Sweet, someone from the Netherlands. That's awesome. Denver, awesome. Sweet, a little global audience here. That is great to see. Sweet. Well, let's dive into the presentation. Oh, we got even more. Sweet. That's awesome. I'm glad to see everyone kind of coming from all over. It's awesome to see that. So let's dive into the kind of agenda. Here's our roadmap for the day. We're going to start by examining the false choice problem. Why platform teams feel stuck between the department of no and watching the infrastructure turn into the Wild West. Then we'll break down the false choice with real solutions and actual live demos, not just slides. And finally, we'll make it real with implementation strategies that you can actually use. And throughout this presentation, like I mentioned before, keep an eye out. We'll have polls and discussion questions along the way. So let's kick it off with the false choice. I'm going to tell you a story that might sound familiar. Meet Sarah. Sarah's a VP of engineering at a startup that's experiencing the beautiful problem of explosive growth. Let me walk you through her journey and see if it sounds familiar to you. Year one, the Wild West. Everyone did everything. Every developer managed their own CI/CD pipelines. And you know what? It actually works. There was fast iteration, lots of experimentation, and a ship it and see what happens mindset. But as Sarah's startup found success, she needed to grow the team. Enter year two, the growing pains. Now we got multiple teams, and what do developers do? Well, they copy and modify existing pipelines, right? If one team has something that works, let's just grab it, tweak it a little bit, and move on. Some teams even got creative with security shortcuts. A common phrase that might have been heard was, we'll add security scanning later. But the ship it and see what happens mindset soon became everyone's nightmare after one too many deployments ruined everyone's weekend plans. Enter year three, the platform team arrives. Leadership says we need to fix this chaos. So logically, they hire a platform team to bring in and bring order. All platform changes now must go through the platform team. 1 week approval cycles become the norm just to change a CI/CD pipeline. And the developers, well, they're frustrated. They're looking for workarounds, maybe even building shadow IT solutions. Anytime you see that friction, right, people are always going to find a way around it. The progress isn't unique to Sarah's company. I see it everywhere in my day-to-day job. The question is, where are you in this journey? Again, this is a common problem that Sarah runs into. Her startup, not unlike many other organizations, as organizations grow from 10 to 100 devs or from hundreds of devs to thousands of developers, CI/CD management becomes exponentially harder. You got three major problems right here. One, you have pipeline sprawl. Every team has their own special snowflake pipeline. No two are alike, and even though they're doing the same thing, they're not alike. Two, you have manual maintenance, right? You want to update a security policy? Well, I hope you enjoy updating 47 different pipeline configurations by hand. And 3, you're stuck with a rigid choice. Rigid standards that everyone hates, or complete autonomy that security hates. There's no middle ground and there's no winning here. So let's get specific and see what platform teams actually struggle with here. With platform teams, you might run into operational inefficiencies. Platform teams waste 50 hours plus a month on repetitive manual updates. That's more than a full work week every month just playing a copy paste engineer. Operational inefficiencies lead to developer bottlenecks. Every dev team gets blocked waiting for the platform team tickets just to customize the pipeline. I've seen teams wait 3 days just to add an environment variable to the CI/CD pipelines. 3 whole days just to add that. That becomes a bottleneck really quick. Then lastly, you run into challenges like security and compliance risk. When security patches take weeks to propagate and config drifts goes undetected, you're not just inefficient, you're vulnerable. Platform teams aren't the bad guys here, but they're stuck in a possible position. So here's how most teams try to solve this, right? They swing between 2 different extremes, right? On the left-hand side, you have developer autonomy, and then on the right-hand side, you have platform team control. With with developer autonomy, you have fast iteration, you have developers feeling empowered, innovation thrives. That sounds so awesome. But you also get pipeline sprawl, which leads to inconsistent security practices, knowledge silos, and compliance nightmares. And then you have, on the other hand, you have a full platform team control. You get consistent standards, you get security enforced, you get compliance coverage, and that sounds awesome on paper as well. But then you get developers waiting for approvals. Platform teams become bottlenecks, innovation slows down to a crawl, and your platform team burns out from the endless pile of tickets that are building up. Most organizations, like I mentioned, ping pong between these 2 extremes. They start off with autonomy, giving developers that freedom, but then something bad happens, whether it's a security incident or something else, and they lock it down. Velocity tanks, and they're like, well, we kind of have to do something to fix this, right? So they loosen things up again, but then something bad happens again. And this cycle, it repeats. It's a rinse and repeat cycle. But it has to be a better way, right? Does this sound familiar? Who's been in Sarah's shoes before? Caught between developer speed and safety. Let's make this a little interactive. I'm going to throw up a poll here, and we can kind of go through the choices you have. Developers, right, have full pipeline control. That's a common situation. Or again, you're ping-ponging the other way. Platform teams control everything, but slow and safe. Or are you kind of in a mix of both, right? Maybe an inconsistent mess. Who owns it? Who's in control? No one really knows. Or are you guys still figuring it out? Let's kind of see from the channel here and see what we're getting. Seeing the poll roll in here. We got a little bit of mix of both, which is common, right? You kind of try the first one, developer platform full control. Then bad things happen. You go to platform team, and now you're kind of in that in-between state. And this is exactly what I see in my day-to-day work, right? People get stuck on option 3 here, and it's the inconsistent middle ground between where you have both disadvantages of both approach and advantages of neither. It's a frustrating place to be right here. Awesome. I think we hopefully can stop sharing the poll there and share the results out. Again, it looks like number 3 here kind of makes it both, which is, again, very common for the industry. But what if I told you, again, this is a false choice? So let's break it down and kind of go a little bit deeper here. So let's break down the false choice, right? Because choosing between control and velocity is like choosing between breathing in and breathing out. You kind of need both to live and thrive, right? But before we go on, I want to hear from y'all. I want to hear what is one word that you would want your ideal platform team relationship to be. Describe it in one word, and let's see what success looks like from all y'all. What does that look like? What do you want your platform team kind of to, have an interaction with the dev team? Is it collaborative? Is it automated? Is it self-serving, empowering? What does that look like? Go ahead and throw your answer in channel here. Okay, empowering, dependency-free. That's really good. But I think here, right, the things that we're not seeing in chat, right, is gatekeeper, ticket system, bottleneck, right? We all want the same thing. We want empowering. We want to be able to drive innovation quicker, right? That's the name of the game here. So let's kind of talk about it, right? Let's talk about the traditional way of thinking, right? What if I told you, going back to Sarah's problem, right? If her problem wasn't necessarily like a choice between control and velocity, the real issue is that we've been thinking about platform team governance all wrong. Traditional thinking states, right? You have standards, which lead to constraints. And then constraints leads to slower development. This is how most of us have been conditioned to think, right? More governance equals less speed. More overhead equals less speed, right? Less innovation, which is true, right? But let's reframe this problem. What if standards could lead to enablement, which leads to faster development? When standards are implemented as guardrails, not gates, and when they're automated, not manual, and when they enable rather than restrict, they actually accelerate development. And this isn't just theoretical. I'm going to show you in a little bit on exactly how this works. But companies that figure this out avoid a massive trade-off, right? They get to use governance as a competitive edge. And we'll see this in just a second. So I hear you. Like, that sounds great, Jim. I want to know more. What's the solution? How can we actually achieve this? So let me show you what we've built here. This is CircleCI's platform team toolkit. We built this because we were tired of seeing platform teams get stuck in this false choice. This toolkit gives you 3 core principles that we'll break down. The first core principle is developer autonomy without burden. Paved paths that unlock developer velocity. Developers get what they need without platform teams becoming the bottleneck. That's the first core principle. The second core principle is scale without sprawl. Eliminate pipeline sprawl and provision at scale. You need to have one source of truth. And then the third and the last core principle is governance without gridlock. Transform standards into speed multipliers. Compliance becomes automatic, not a checkpoint. The key insight here is that these aren't separate things. They work and come together to show and have impact. Now, you might notice some things at the bottom right here, platform team toolkit features like centralized configs, overrides, URL orbs, allow lists, Terraform providers, project administration APIs, and config policies. These are all features of CircleCI that all come together to help enable the platform team toolkit. And don't worry, if you haven't heard some of these, that's perfectly fine. We'll break it down before we jump into the demo so everyone's on the same page. So before we jump into the demo, let me show you what the architecture, let's show you what we kind of came up with. First, we are using ports as an internal developer portal. That's going to be a self-service interface. Next, we have CircleCI as the automation engine that orchestrates everything. And then we use Terraform as infrastructure as code, which ensures consistency and repeatability across this platform team toolkit. So quick poll here. I know IDPs are relatively new in the industry. IDP standing for Internal Developer Portal. I want to hear from y'all of what you might be using right now. Is it Port, Backstage? Backstage was open sourced by Spotify a little bit. You have Cortex, you have Indifference, you have homegrown tools. I know my time at IBM, we in a pinch used Jenkins a lot for our self-service portal. Or is it just not on the agenda? Like maybe, again, IDPs are relatively new in the space, at least in my opinion. And there's a lot of teams that don't have them just yet. So let me hear from y'all. Let's see where the kind of readout is. I see a couple of people on Backstage. That's awesome. It's always cool to see Backstage. Again, one of the first kind of, I would say, original kind of self-service portals out there. Homegrown, that's very common. Again, I see that in my day-to-day work a lot. Good companies and good platform teams realize there's this pain and build internal tooling that happens all the time. Sometimes it becomes a maintenance burden, which we all know. But I see a lot of people not using IDPs. Well, hopefully we can kind of show today why they have value, and maybe it's something that to look into and adopt. because they really do provide value, and is one of the core pillars of the platform team toolkit as we get into. So let's talk about the demo flow and break it down for us. So we're going to start off with a developer, right? A developer is going to go to a self-service portal, right? Again, that could be ports, that could be Jenkins, that could be homegrown tools. You need some place that a developer can come in and have a catalog of different actions they can take. This is very important here, and we'll kind of get into why a little bit later on during the demo session. But when a developer goes to ports or your IDP, they're going to be able to select from a catalog of actions they want to fill out. And filling out a form is pretty much the most basic kind of action in an IDP, or clicking a button sometimes, right? Sometimes there's not things to kind of inputs. In our specific demo, as we'll show off in a second, we're going to be selecting from a repository template, which provides developers with a nice jumpstart guide on how we want to shape development at our companies. And then next, we're going to have ports actually send a webhook over to CircleCI. Now, CircleCI, usually most people think CI/CD infrastructure or platforms are usually GitOps model, right? You push some sort of new code, your CI/CD system will go ahead and take action based on that. You can think of things like opening a PR, being able to respond to someone pushing to a dev branch, kind of common actions. But at CircleCI, we like to have think of it as something we call sources of change. Sources of change can be a wide variety of things, whether that's a webhook coming from an external system like ports, or even from a logging tool like Datadog, for example. If you want CircleCI or your CI/CD system to respond and triage a production issue when you have X number of issues detected in your production environment through your logging platform, send a webhook over to CircleCI, gather all the documents, exec into maybe a Kubernetes cluster, kind of do some triaging of getting all the information and make it actionable for your SREs or your incident response team to take the first steps. That's how we're going to be using CircleCI today, is through the external source of change, which will be through ports. CircleCI is going to run a couple of different things. One of those things is going to be Terraform. Terraform, again, is going to act as a source of truth. It is how we're going to be provisioning a repository on our VCS, version control system. In this example, we're going to be showing off GitHub. It could be any VCS for that matter that supports repo templates. So it's things like Bitbucket, GitLab, GitHub, pretty much all of the major VCS providers support repository templates. And then you have the onboarding of that project to CircleCI. So after we create a repository from our best practices and from this template the platform teams don't put together, we need to onboard that project onto CircleCI so that the moment a developer does their first commit to that new repository that they create or that new service, CI/CD configuration is configured with those best practices right from the get-go. And all of this happens in under 2 minutes. Now, I know some teams and some customers I've worked with take days to do this. They put a ticket in with their platform team to, hey, I need to provision this environment, I need to provision this infrastructure, and it takes days to respond. That whole process, especially when we're driving it through a self-service portal, can take minutes. I'll show you how with our demo here. So let's talk about the first pillar of the platform team toolkit. We talked about developer autonomy without burden being the first one. And this is where most people hit the first roadblock. Developer autonomy without burden is really about having and enabling a self-service action. You do not want your platform teams becoming a bottleneck for your developers. The amount of tickets that platform teams have to deal with can be overwhelming. Just go thinking back to Sarah's example. When she implemented a platform team, things slowed down to a 1-week turnaround, right? And I bet that platform team is having hundreds of tickets coming from all the developers requesting many different things to be spun up. And that's where the self-service motion becomes super important. So let me go ahead and hop over to port. We're going to start there. But again, it doesn't need to be port. CircleCI it can be used as a self-service action, as a self-service portal. Jenkins, like I mentioned before, it can be very homegrown. You just need some spot that developers can fill out different things, kind of customize their request, and then for something like a system to send a webhook to another system to go ahead and process that. So let me hop over to my demo here. Can I get a thumbs up in chat if y'all are able to see my browser? I just want to make sure the demo is working here. Looks good. All right, awesome. Thank you guys so much. All right, let's talk about developer autonomy. So, like I mentioned, this is ports. This is going to be our IDP, internal developer portal. This is going to be the self-service engine that we are using. I won't spend too long on ports. I encourage everyone to go check out port if you're interested, or again, many of the other common IDPs. Do your little bit of research, kind of figure out which one might fit your best needs. The main thing with IDP that you should be looking for is some sort of catalog. Catalogs will let you build up a collection of actions that you can build and then put together and string together for self-service actions for developers to take. And it's not just developers. You can think of a IDP as a hub for automation for any person in your company. A common use case I used to see a lot at IBM was when we onboard new developers and new people to the company. We had, again, back in my day, we were using Jenkins, but we had this little form that even HR could fill out, or managers with new hires could fill out. They would put in the name, emails, kind of what systems they need access to, and then automation would kind of take care of the rest. This automation in the self-service portal, again, is crucial. And we'll talk a little bit more about it later on. So in this example, I have gone up and set up a self-service action for my developers anytime they want to start a new project, anytime they want to go ahead and spin up a new repository. I want my developers to have a way to do that in an automated fashion, because a couple of things, and we'll touch on this on the second pillar, scale out sprawl, but it's important to go ahead and define your paved path for developers. If you are having problems internally at your organization with code quality or how things are set up, maybe your mobile team is completely different setup wise, tech stack, testing frameworks, kind of just standards might be a little bit different than maybe your backend team. This is a great way to help unify that. Again, the name of the game is about centralization and unification, because if you think about it, anytime you have unique pipelines, you're going to have more and more tickets into your platform team to deal with those unique edge cases. So the more you can standardize and the more you can unify things, the better it becomes. In this self-service action, if I hit create, you can see a couple of things right here. One is our GitHub repo templates. This GitHub repo template, if you're unfamiliar with repo templates, they're just meant to act as a starting guide for developers or for anyone to start a new repository in their VCS. These kind of starter guides or these starter templates act as giving your developers the best practices right from the get-go. So for example, we have two different languages that we are supporting, and these are, again, helping inform developers on best practices on how our company does Python development, how our company does Node.js development. You can really customize them to how your company and your organization wants to define those standards. Inside this repo template, I'll show off in a second, it does have a little bit of a pre-done Docker file. All right, we're a Kubernetes shop here at CircleCI, so we want all our apps containerized. So we're giving our developers a starting block to build off on by providing them a sample Docker file. We're providing them sample tests as well, sample code structure of how the repo should be laid out, and a robust README as well to help encourage best practices when it comes to documentation. So I'm going to select Python right here. I'm going to put in the name of the demo. I'm just going to do test lead dev as we are at the workshop right here. I'm going to hit execute. As soon as I hit execute, what's going to happen is port is going to collect these inputs, do a little bit of formatting on its side, and then send a webhook over to CircleCI, where CircleCI can open up that webhook, look at the contents, and run some sort of automation. And if I hit execute, Now, I want to start your guys' timers. You keep me honest here. I mentioned we're going to aim for 2 minutes here. So in 2 minutes, what's going to happen is, as a developer, I will have a repository configured, a CI/CD pipeline configured as well, and I'll be able to clone that repository down to my local laptop and start development right from the get-go. So with that webhook fired off, I can hop over to CircleCI. And we already can see a pipeline running on CircleCI. If I look over here, I can see that we have a custom webhook that was fired coming from port, our IVP right here, started 27 seconds ago, and it's been running for about 37, 38 seconds right here. If I come look at the workflow, we have one job in CircleCI, which is called configuration CCI. If I hop in here, I can see that we're doing a couple of things behind the covers here, behind the curtain. We are first using Terraform as a primary way to kind of spin up this additional infrastructure, which is going to be the repository and a couple other things in CircleCI. And then we also can see that we are integrating with AWS. One of the key things that we do is go ahead and integrate with AWS Secrets Vault to pull secrets down from a centralized vault and inject them into CircleCI. Why? Well, as a developer, you might need to be able to deploy to dev or interact with different test infrastructure that you might have. And we want to set up all those credentials already inside of CircleCI. So as soon as I push as a developer, it's already set up from the get-go. As a developer, I don't care, nor should I care about all those credentials being set up. That's something the platform team should own and take care of, or in conjunction maybe with the security team as well. You don't need to automatically inject the security credentials. With CircleCI, you always can fetch them dynamically, but it is one of the easiest ways to kind of get up and running here. Now, down at the bottom, you can see Terraform apply. We, again, have a couple of outputs here. We're going to have a repository created in GitHub using our repo templates. We onboarded the project to CircleCI, and we configured some secrets via our CircleCI context, which are a way that CircleCI stores secrets to be utilized in our CI/CD configuration. And then we went ahead and triggered an empty commit onside that repository just to show that, hey, it's all working and the CI/CD configuration is set up correctly. So if I come over to this tab right here, this is a collection of all my projects I have set up for my CircleCI organization. And if I look for testing, we can see that we have lead dev here. If I look for it, what did I name the self-service right here? If I go back, I named it, I think I can look at the inputs right here. Well, it doesn't really matter inputs details right here. We named it test lead dev. So let me go back here and look for that project called test lead dev. Maybe I just need to do a refresheroo on the pipelines page right here. And I can see that I have test lead dev right here. So I'll hop over into this project. We can see that it's already set up with CircleCI. We can see that we already have a pipeline ran, and that was because we triggered that empty commit. And if I go to view all pipelines, we can see that this pipeline is pretty basic, but this is what we're going to be doing, setting up our CI/CD configuration, especially when we talk about core principle number 2, scale without sprawl. But you can see here we have a build, a test, and deploy. Pretty easy kind of building blocks to a CI/CD configuration. We can get more customized, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on here. I see a question from Maddie. Is this using GitHub OAuth or GitHub API or app integration? Great question. On CircleCI, there's a couple of different ways to set up different accounts, but this is using our standalone organization. This would work both on GitHub OAuth and GitHub app integrations on CircleCI. You should be able to complete this and utilize the platform team toolkit with either integration as well. If I come over here, again, we can see that I have my pipeline configured, build, test, deploy. And if I go over to my CircleCI organization in GitHub, I can give it a little refresheroo right here, and I can see my testing lead dev. Now, if I drill down to my testing lead dev, this is the repository that got created. And again, if I go back to CircleCI, this whole end-to-end process, I know I've been talking a little bit, but the whole end-to-end process from me hitting the button as a developer in ports to it spinning up my infrastructure and configuring my repository, onboarding the project to CircleCI is less than a minute. Right? I said under 2 minutes. I think we accomplished that. We're almost under a minute as well. I'm sure we can maybe squeak a little bit more performance and claim under a minute as well. But let's go look at this kind of repo template that I mentioned. You can see up the top, we are pulling from CCI Labs Python starter template. And again, a starter template is meant to act as a foundation for developers to go ahead and build off of. We want to provide a paved path approach and a good foundation to encourage developers to have best practices. So if we take a look at the README, there's not too much actual code here. It's just the framework of a project. So again, developers can take it and utilize it. So you might see that, hey, we defined a CircleCI config, we defined some tests, we defined some scaffolding when it comes to code. And we also have this little Docker file right here to kind of say, hey, we want to encourage to containerize these applications right here. I see another question from the audience, which is great. What if you're working with monorepos where projects aren't repository level? That's a great question. Now, with kind of the platform team toolkit and monorepos, you probably aren't necessarily setting up a monorepo each and every day. I would be interested in maybe in the live Q&A when we kind of get there at the end to hear a little bit more about your monorepo setup. Usually with monorepos, we can still utilize aspects of the platform team toolkit to help the overall sprawl. And I think the next part of the demo will go much more into that, Dan. So hold off for a second. If I don't answer your question, we'll make sure to cover it at the end. So that is the first set, right? Developer autonomy. As a developer, I could serve myself with self-action. I went to port, my IDP of choice. I configured my project, and all I need to do now is do clone and go to my IDE and get started, right? And as soon as I do my first push on this repository with actual code, my CI/CD pipeline will kick into action again, which is defined by the platform team and has all these best practices. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we can customize this in the next demo section. So let me hop back to some slides. What do we see here again? It's about self-service. Dev autonomy without burden is about relieving the developers so that they can go ahead and self-service so they're not blocked by the platform teams. Platform teams on the other side do not want to be dealing with tickets 24/7. They want to be able to work on more strategic things like enabling more self-service actions or working on that one thing from the backlog that's been on there for years that we don't have time to work on. If the platform teams are constantly dealing with tickets or putting out fires, you're never taking a step forwards, or even if you are taking a step forwards, you might end up taking 2 steps back. So self-service is one of the first things you need to do to enable this. And let's talk a little bit about why self-service matters. I want to give you a real world example. Recently, I worked with a bank, roughly 2,000 developers. They had about a 50-person platform team, and their average time to provision a new service was 11 days, which is huge. By the time developers actually got access to the repositories, environments, whatever they requested, they almost forgot what they even wanted to build in the first place. That's how long 11 days was to developers to wait for that infrastructure to be provisioned. After they utilize CircleCI's platform team toolkit, and especially when we're talking about the first one, developer autonomy without burden and implementing a self-service action, it just dropped down to 20 minutes. You might have thought, hey, Jim, you were able to do that in 2 minutes. 20 minutes is still bad. Well, it might be a little bit more complex. We were just spinning up repositories and configuring and onboarding that project into CircleCI. But you can imagine more complex scenarios like, hey, you need a whole Kubernetes cluster, or you need some sort of test bed. There might be a little bit more overhead depending on what self-service actions you are enabling for your developers. So 20 minutes from 11 days is a huge improvement. But what really happened was developers stopped hoarding resources. Before, when it took 11 days to get an environment, you never wanted to give it back, right? You keep the test environments or whatever infrastructure they spun up just in case you needed it, right? Because you didn't want to wait those 11 days. With 20 minutes in provisioning time, they spin up what they need, use it, and tear it down. Resource utilization at that bank for the dev environments dropped by 40%. I can even attest to this a little bit at IBM. We were maybe the ones that were hoarding some resources myself. but it took a while to get those resources. You never wanted to give up a VM or a Kubernetes cluster after you waited X number of days just to get it. But with dropping it down to minutes, things were so much easier that I could just spin it up again in minutes. There's no need for me to hold on to that infrastructure. But the real win at this bank was the platform team. Again, we talked about this a little bit before, but they went from processing 200 tickets per week to actually being able to build platform capabilities, thus creating real impact for the business. Again, they went from ticket jockeys, being able to just field a bunch of tickets from the developers, to actually being able to work on that backlog that they never got a chance to do. And one of the greatest things about self-service is you can start small, enable the little things and little delights that developers love, and then the tickets slowly start fading away, right? You automate the small stuff, and then you have more free time to work on the bigger stuff. And the more and more you build up your IDP with self-service actions, the less you're going to get from developers coming out to you. You still will get people coming to you as a platform team saying, hey, I need XYZ. But that's the beauty of this. You cut the number of tickets coming in so you have time to deal with those unique situations, so you can go back and adapt maybe your self-service actions to accommodate those special things. So let's talk about the next pillar right here. Scale without sprawl. Remember Sarah from earlier, our example? I want to show you where her platform team went wrong and how we can fix it. But before we jump into that, I want to hear from you. Where does your platform team currently manage CI/CD configurations, right? Do they copy and paste them between projects? Does each team maintain their own? Do you guys utilize centralized configs and shared templates? Does your platform team manage everything? Or are we way off base and you're like, I don't even know what a CI/CD configuration is? Let's hear from you guys. Okay, I'm seeing a couple answers come in. I'm glad I'm not seeing the first option, which is perfectly fine. If you have to copy and paste between things, no shame here. We all got to start somewhere. I'm seeing a lot of people using centralized templates and shared configs already, which is great. That's one of the first major steps. But we'll see, even with Sarah's example, she did implement a platform team and she was able to still run into issues where they were still having 11-day turnarounds with their platform team, and developers hated it so much that they started to do shadow IT, work around that friction point. So while we are still utilizing centralized templates, there are some dragons to be aware of that we need to kind of iron out, and our platform team toolkit helps with those. Okay, I think I see, again, it looks like centralized platform team toolkit, one out, which is great. Platform teams manage everything is also pretty popular. I didn't see anyone saying they have no clue what a CI/CD configuration is, which is great here. So let's dive into this pillar of CI/CD, all right, our platform team toolkit. What does scale without sprawl mean in this context? So let me show you that. Coming back over here, hopefully you all can see my browser just fine. Let's look at how we enabled this on CircleCI with our platform team toolkit. So right now we have this repository called platform team configs. This is the centralized place that the platform team puts all the core configs. This is the place where developers can also get an understanding about what those configs are doing and even some enablement material on how to utilize them better. That's a key point here. You don't necessarily want to lock away this repository where the developers have no access to it. You want to be transparent, and you want developers, because developers have decent ideas, right? They might be a little bit more focused on their core project, whether that may be mobile development or backend development, but they know what they need when it comes to building and testing their software. They might struggle on the later half when they're talking about security or deployments that may be more the wheelhouse of the platform team, but it's always good to be collaborative. I will note that when you do set up something like this, while you should allow it to be viewable by everyone, it is always good to gate who can have edits, right? So the platform team makes sense to have ownership of this, but don't disallow PR requests. Don't disallow issues, right? This should be collaborative right here. A platform team shouldn't hide away what's actually happening in the CI/CD configuration, because then it becomes a black box that no one really understands, and developers can get frustrated there. So let's look at how we set up this repository here, and specifically around the config templates. So if you come into the config templates, we see that we built our config templates around kind of different tech stacks or language stacks, which is a very common thing that we see across the industry, right? You want to enforce best practices when it comes to how you do Python development, how you do Clojure development, Go, whatever language that you guys utilize in your current company. It's always good to kind of break it up. And then even if you need to break those bigger kind of buckets up into smaller configuration templates, you can as well. Start off with kind of broad topics, maybe language specific or tech stack specific, and then you always can break it up into more finer grained use cases. In our example, if we go back to ports, right, we use Python. So let's take a look at the Python configuration template right here. So if I go into the Python, I can see my config.yaml. I won't be going into how CircleCI necessarily works. We do have a deeper dive I'll share at the end where you guys can go a little bit more technical in the presentation. I'm going to keep it a little bit more higher level and kind of breeze through the configuration, but I want to go over the major building blocks that is common patterns that you can use even if you're on CircleCI. As well, I encourage you all to use CircleCI, but I understand many other people have different CI/CD tools, but these common practices can be utilized across CI/CD tools. And if your CI/CD tool doesn't have these, then it might be worth considering a time to evaluate another tool that can help you enable this. So the main thing as a platform team that you want to do is set up the framework, set up the overarching structure of what your CI/CD pipeline should look like. In our basic example that we have here, we're defining what a build job looks like. We're defining that even a pipeline should have a test job and should have a deploy job. Now, these are, again, very basic here. You might want also a security job. You might want a linting job. You might want end-to-end testing job. It's your job as a platform team to come up with what a CI/CD pipeline should look like and expose that to your developers so they can utilize that. Now, inside here, we have our build job defined. And then if I go down here, we can actually see what the build job actually is made up of. In this example, we just have a simple build job. It's just checking out the code and it's doing echo build application. But hold up, wait a minute. Let me go back to what we saw before when we spun up that pipeline and look at the build job in particular. So this is a little bit different of a project I spun up, but still using the same Python template right here. Let's look at this build application job because it looks a little bit different than what we're seeing here. We can see there's a Docker login, a Docker build, saving a Docker image, and all this more complex stuff. But if I go back to the repo templates, I'm just seeing that there's a build and echo statements, right? There's not this whole Docker concept. What happens here? Well, this is one of the key differences between Sarah's implementation with her platform team and what we can do to set up for success with CircleCI's platform team toolkits. One of the key things is to be flexible. Right? We still want to enforce best practices in that paved path approach with all those best practices included, but you want to give your developers and your audience a little flexibility. Now, that's not saying, hey, ping it all the way over to dev autonomy and let them go wild, right? You want to strike a balance between platform team enablements and autonomy and dev autonomy. And we do that through something we call override with. Override with allows platform teams to say, hey, for this build job, we want the developers to have the freedom to go ahead and customize the build command. And the same thing with the test command, right? But maybe for some jobs, you don't want overrides with. Some jobs that come to mind is security scanning, right? You want to make sure security scanning happens, and you don't necessarily want developers to opt out of security scanning, which Sarah read into in our kind of example above. People started kind of opting out of the security. We'll add security scanning later, right? And they never do, right? So there's certain jobs that we don't want overrides with, but there's jobs like testing and building where your developers at least should know better, right, than maybe the platform team, right? They should know how to build their application. They should know how to test their application. But when it comes to deployments, the platform team might step in and say, hey, this is how we standardize deployments across the company. You need to keep in line with that. So this overrides with right here might be something that we want to take out. And this overrides with, again, allows dev teams to customize this build job. And that's exactly what we're seeing here is the developers went ahead and customized this build command to go ahead and build their Docker image. And we can see that by going over to the repository that we spun up from before using the repo template. If I go into the CircleCI folder right here, we can see that there's a team config right here. Now, this team config, importantly, is not a full-fledged CI/CD configuration. This configuration by itself would not work on CircleCI. It would not execute at all. But what this is the platform or the dev teams able to override those defaults that the platform team is giving us. They are overriding the build job. They are overriding the test job. And if we look right here, this is exactly what we're seeing on CircleCI's platform, right? We see that Docker is being installed and Docker is actually being built. And this is the platform or the dev team go ahead and overriding, customizing this. Now, this is a key point here that a lot of platform teams get stuck with. If you don't provide flexibility to your developers to have a little bit of autonomy, and you pick the full option of platform teams must own everything, it's the law, everything's locked down, then your developers are going to revolt, right? They're going to look around for other solutions, right? They don't hit that friction step and be like, well, maybe we'll sign up with a different CI/CD system, or maybe start using their own custom tooling, right? And that's where shadow IT situations become rampant and become a major problem, especially when you get to audits and you are attesting, if you're a financial industry, right? You need to attest to the government that, hey, look, security scans did happen. But when you have shadow IT organizations that you as a platform team might not even know about, you're going to fail those audits because that one dev team had problems with your platform team or platform team setup and didn't mention it because they didn't want to create friction, or they just wanted to get things done quickly, and now are skirting around your rules. And this is why that flexibility piece is so important here. And again, it's not just these overrides. That's just one way to accomplish it. And we'll talk about the third pillar when we talk about governance with Gridlock and how we can still have these guardrails up to protect the platform teams, to make sure even with these overrides, there might be some risk that, hey, developers are still overriding those build jobs and overriding the test jobs. But are they actually testing, right? Don't you want to make sure that certain things get tested, right, before they go out to production? And we'll talk about how we can enforce that with the third pillar. Our third principle, my bad. Awesome. So let's hop back to the presentation here. Again, what we saw with scale without sprawl is the main takeaway is you need one source of truth. You need a centralized place, which again, by the poll, it seems like a lot of you are already doing centralized templates, shared configs, which is great. But if you aren't providing that flexibility for your developers and don't have that good line of communication between developers and your platform team, you're going to run into situations where your devs start revolting and finding other solutions. And that's exactly where Sarah failed with her implementation of the platform team. Just because you hire a platform team and implement these standards does not mean that it's going to be successful. You need to allow this flexibility inside your platform team to thrive and your dev teams to thrive as well. So let's talk about the last pillar, right? Governance without gridlock. We just showed you that, hey, we have the self-service action. Developers now can go ahead and provision infrastructure seamlessly. They're not bogging down your platform team with a bunch of tickets. We just saw that we can utilize a centralized place to kind of inform those best practices, but we introduce this flexibility, right? And sometimes that flexibility gets scary, right? You know, there might be issues with that, right? Oh, how do we know if this is happening? Or how do we know that developers aren't skirting it? And this is where governance without gridlock comes into play. I do see a question from Maddie as well. Is the team config included in the new repo template automatically? That's a great question. Let me hop back there just for a second before we touch on governance with gridlock. So if we hop back here, Maddie, to answer your question, yes, the repo templates that we saw here is automatically included with the team config. Now, this is just a perfectly designed choice right here. Like, hey, you don't want necessarily to include overrides to your dev teams by default, right? It might make sense to encourage your developer teams to, hey, take a little more active role in the CI/CD process by encouraging them to use overrides, because again, they should know how to test and build their applications hopefully better than the platform team. I know that's sometimes a common friction point where, like, everyone just says, hey, you're the platform team, deal with it. Like, this is an error, a CI/CD error. It's your fault. They pass the ball over to your court. But a really healthy balance is when you get developers involved in the CI/CD process and encourage them to take an active role, because then they have ownership, they have stake in this process. So by default, yes, we include the team config, but in a normal real world situation, you might not include this, right? You might include helpful commands, which are building blocks, but as long as you don't define these jobs, they will always fall back to what the platform team has defined as the defaults. So if I took out the team config from that repo templates, it would fall automatically back to the platform team defaults, which should be sensible defaults. But again, the developers should really be customizing at least the build and test jobs, at least in my opinion, to be a little bit more involved in the process there. Great question. Just taking a sip of water here. So let's talk about governance without gridlock, right? The main part that we're trying to get to is we offer this flexibility, but how do we know that dev teams aren't still going around things? And how do we know that dev teams are still following our paved path approach? We did everything. We did self-service. We had centralized configs. Everything seems good, but how do we, at the highest level, know that developers are following these things? That's where governance without gridlock is this important thing. And it's important to note that when we talked about developer kind of freedom and roadblocks and stuff like that, you want to make governance without gridlock automatic, not a manual process. And we'll see this in just a second in CircleCI. What I mean by that is if you have this kind of governance in place with these gates and it's becoming a friction point for developers, again, anytime there's friction, developers will start to go around it or get frustrated with it, and dev productivity will fall. So let's see how we kind of tackle this, where we come in an automated fashion with governance, with gridlocks, and how we can put those guardrails up in place to push your developers back from that paved path approach. So if I come over here, we can look at that. So the keen eye among you might have seen this when we ran the demo before. You saw the pipeline, right? The build, the test, the deploy, which is great. But you might have saw this policy violation. Now, in CircleCI, we have something called config policies. Other CI/CD systems might have similar features, but I really like how CircleCI enables our config policies. Config policies dictate what can and cannot happen inside a CI/CD configuration, meaning you can say, hey, security scanning must be present in the config, and if not, we'll go ahead and flag that violation in CircleCI. Now, there's two different ways to flag a violation. We have something called soft failures. Soft failures are exactly what you're seeing here. So in this specific situation, we can see the policy violation right here. And we'll read it together and kind of dig into it. It says Python minimum version. The job test application right here uses Python version 3.13.4, which is below the minimum version of 3.13.5. Please update this image for this specific version or higher. Please contact the platform team or see this repository right here. Now, if I actually hop over to the repository, this is the same exact centralized place that we had to store our config templates, but instead of drilling down into the config templates that we did before, we're in the policies folder. Now, the policy folder is, again, one of the things I encourage you a lot to do is have really good documentation and make this a collaborative, open, transparent process with your developers. Don't gate the platform team configs and policies away themselves, right? Make them transparent to the developers so they have insights on what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how they can resolve it. So with CircleCI, our policies are based on OPA, Open Policy Agent. It's an industry standard. OPA lets you write policies for pretty much anything. You can imagine a situation where you want to enforce kind of best practices with Terraform. You can have a policy that dictates what the Terraform config looks like. You can have policies that dictate what Kubernetes files and manifest files look like. It's a really powerful tool that I encourage you all to look at, not just for CI/CD configuration, but for other things in your organization as well. In this specific instance, we're taking OPA, applying it to CircleCI policies to go ahead and, again, to dictate what can and cannot happen inside our configuration file. At CircleCI, we have two different kind of modes of operation for config policies. I mentioned before, stop failure, which is going to allow the pipeline to continue. As we saw here, it notifies the developer that, hey, there is a violation, but your pipeline and your jobs can still continue on. And you might be thinking, well, Jim, if I'm enforcing a security standard, what use is a soft failure like this that doesn't actually block the pipeline, right? I'm going to fail my audit because I didn't enforce security scanning. And that's a great question, because the second thing we have is a hard failure. Hard failures will go ahead and look at your config before any pipeline is go ahead and ran on the CI/CD platform and determine that, hey, there is a violation, and you'll just see this big giant error message right here indicating to your developers that, hey, no pipeline has been ran and the pipeline has been halted, no jobs have been spun up because there's these clear violations. Why do we have soft failures if they're not going to enforce anything? Well, soft failures are a great way to not have those roadblocks and frustration points for developers. A soft failure allows you to implement these policies in a gradual rollout, meaning if you want to start having policies, do not just enable them right from the get-go and lock things down completely, right? That's how you don't lead to developer frustration and them kind of skirting around these situations. What you need to do is a soft rollout, meaning implement your policies and give them a slap on the wrist saying, hey, yes, this is not correct, but we're still allowing your pipeline to continue, right? Implement it for 30 days, and then in CircleCI, you can switch it from a soft failure to a hard failure, which is, again, going to halt the pipeline from continuing. But you give them a window, a change validation window for them to go ahead and make that change. And if they don't, that's on them. And they need to get in contact with the platform team to help resolve that, or the security team as well. So if we look at what the policy actually looks like behind the scenes, it is Rego-based, like I mentioned. But one of the things I want to show off here before we kind of show off the policy, looking at a Rego file isn't overly fun, but I want to show you this right here. And this is the key point I want to make, is it's not just enough to implement policy violations, these guardrails to bump developers back in place. You can bump them all you want back to that paved path approach, but they're going to get frustrated if they don't know how they can self-service and resolve those issues themselves. So getting clear documentation on why there was a violation, why the violation exists, and how they can go ahead and resolve it with clear examples is super important for a successful implementation of this. So again, make sure when you implement policies to use that soft failure first, switch to a hard failure after that rolling window, and make sure you have documentation for your developers to go ahead and self-service why there's a violation and how they can fix it. I will show off the Rego just very briefly, just because there's a couple cool things in here. By default, when you enable a policy on CircleCI, it's going to apply across the entire organization. So any pipeline from any team, from any project is going to get flagged for violations. But you always can narrow the scope. If you want to target specific projects, specific teams, or exclude specific projects and specific teams, you can do that inside the policy itself. For example, I'm giving a pipeline ID right here, and you can do some other clever solutions to make it a little bit more human readable. You always can reference the name of the project instead of the pipeline ID to make it a little bit easier to read. But this is going to say, hey, this policy is going to apply everywhere across my CircleCI organization, but go ahead and exclude this project. Why exclude some projects? Well, you might want to break glass projects, just make sure that, hey, certain things are always able to be pushed out no matter what. And that's, again, you can get even more creative with these policies. Policies are really, really powerful. I encourage anyone who uses CircleCI or anyone who maybe isn't on CircleCI to look at CircleCI's policy implementation and question if your CI/CD platform has features like this to implement, because it becomes powerful. For example, if you wanted to have a break glass situation where, hey, we need to push out a hot fix, but these violations are still causing issues, the violations should be resolved, right? We should be following best practices, but sometimes there's situations that you need to push things out. You can always use metadata from your VCS inside the policy engine. So I can determine what branch I'm on. So if the branch maybe starts with hot fix, don't flag these policies for violation, allow them to continue. It's very flexible and very powerful. And I just wanted to show you in the UI on here, you always can look at what policies are active in CircleCI by going to your organization setting, and you're able to kind of see, hey, the policy was updated this time ago, and you can look at the live policy right here instead of having to go over to GitHub if you didn't want to. So that is governance without gridlock. Again, the main takeaway there is you provide this flexibility with centralized configs and with overrides, but you always want to trust but verify, right? We are verifying that every single project is going to perform at the things that we expect. Everything has a security vulnerability scan. We want to make sure that they're using the correct versions. Think back to the recent instance with npm. If you're a node developer, there's a lot of like security vulnerabilities with packages being hijacked. You can use policies to help disable or look for projects that might be utilizing compromised packages. One of our engineers actually was able to resolve this for our customers in under an hour by providing them a policy that the customer could implement, and they were so much more productive once they got that policy in place and could actually understand the impact of that vulnerabilities across their CI/CD infrastructure. So this is great, right? Hey, you can actually utilize this, but cool demos are amazing, but what's the real impact? Okay, what's the business impact of implementing something like the Platform Team Toolkit? Well, let me tell you 4 quick stories that kind of put it all in the summary for you. Again, I work with Fortune 500 companies, some of CircleCI's largest largest customers across our platform, and I kind of seen it all, right? So let me talk about a little bit faster time to market and show a couple of examples from my work with customers. So when we're talking about faster time to market, I worked with a fintech startup that was losing deals to their competitors because they could ship features faster. And it wasn't because developers were slow at this team, at this company. The developers were great developers, right? Very highly sought after, really senior, and they were able to pump out a lot of code. But it took 3 days to provision a new service. But after implementing the Platform Team Toolkits, they were able to ship critical features in response to customers' requests in under 48 hours. Again, the developers weren't slow. It was the bottleneck of the process the platform team put into place that was slowing down their company's ability to execute and to actually deliver value to their customers, right? That's the end of the day. We always got to think about the value we are providing our customers, right? As much as we like to come up with fancy solutions and all that, if we can't ship value to our customers, then there's a problem. So let's talk about scalable governance, right? Remember Log4j? Similar to the kind of NPM situation, but one of our customers had to patch over 400 different microservices. It took their competitor over 2 weeks with a bunch of people hands on deck just to get Log4j remediated and fixed. But our customers, they were able to do it in 4 hours with one person by implementing this platform team toolkit. They were able to utilize that centralized config structure, that one source of truth, be able to update it once there and push it out, and they were done, right? That is one of the powers of having that centralized config and that one source of truth. When all your projects are related back to that centralized config, it's so much easier to iterate and push out new things when you need to change. What about operational risk, right? Well, I worked with a healthcare company that failed their SOC 2 compliance. Why? Well, because they had inconsistent security practices across teams. They ran into a situation, like I've been talking about, with shadow IT. They thought all their developers were following these best practices, but lo and behold, what ended up happening was there's teams that were not doing security scanning, right? But after implementing the platform team toolkit, and especially with this centralized governance model with that flexible overrides, they didn't just pass their next audits. The auditor asked it if they could use them as a reference architecture on how development should happen. They had the same developers, the same pace of development, but completely different risk profile after implementing the platform team toolkit. And lastly, when it comes to improve developer productivity, this is my favorite story to share, but a platform team lead once told me that their ticket volume dropped 80%. I asked them, what do they do with all that free time, right? Like, you don't have to deal with that many tickets, right? 80% is a huge cut. And they're like, we actually built the features that have been on our backlog for 2 years for developers. And the most impactful result, I think, of that, right? Great for the platform team, but I think the real major impact they had was when they ran their DevX surveys at the end of the year, their satisfaction score for developers went up by 40%. That's because they were able to take a little bit more ownership, have a little bit more flexibility, and be able to have these self-service actions that the platform team was never able to deliver because they were working on those tickets, that endless pile of tickets to resolve. They actually had a little bit more free time to actually implement and have an impact for the team. So this is great, right? Like, it sounds awesome on paper, but how do we actually make it real? How do we take that next step on implementing it, right? Because it might sound daunting. Well, the implementation playbook is simple, right? You have three main phases. One, you can identify your pipeline sprawl, right? And that's the first step. You can't fix what you don't measure. You need to understand where the skeletons are inside your development process, right? Where those crufty corners are, where maybe things aren't exactly how you would want it. Identify the sprawl, identify the issues, and then we can go on to phase two, right? Design governance that accelerates. This is where you don't build your right foundation, or you're able to actually design a system that's going to grow with your needs and act as a force multiplier there. And then lastly, you need to transform your platform team, right? You need to change your operational model. This isn't a 2-year transformation. It might sound daunting at first, but you can start seeing results in weeks. And let me show you how we can do that. So let's break it down phase by phase, right? Phase one, you need to face reality, right? You need to know how bad things truly are. So here's your homework. Next week, you need to run an audit. You need to run this audit on figuring out how many unique pipeline configurations you have. How many of them are basically doing the same thing? How long does it take to implement security fixes across all the pipelines if something does go bad? I guarantee you will find at least 3 things that make you go, oh my God, how did it get this bad? But that's a good thing, right? Realizing that you have this problem and being able to document it and not blame anyone, but to build a business case, a case for better change. Phase two, right? This is where we're putting it together, right? Designing the future state. But here's where most organizations fail. They try to standardize everything, right? They want to have this future state. They want to kind of standardize everything and make everything super rigid. I saw a platform team once try to standardize logging. And you might be thinking, Jim, that's good. It's good, right? It's not log aggregation where they're like, oh, let's send everything to Datadog or Splunk. They wanted to standardize the actual log format. Again, Jim, maybe that's not too bad, but they wanted to do it for every single application, vendor specific applications, and also custom made applications, which was not possible. Developers revolted and the initiative had died as quickly as it was introduced. Instead, what I use is something called the wedding cake model. Wedding cakes have many different layers, and you want to start off with the bottom layer, right? That foundation, the stuff that everyone needs and no one argues about. Security scanning, secrets management, basic monitoring. Standardize that and make it rock solid. Next, you have the middle layer, right? The common patterns that teams use most. Deployment strategies, testing frameworks, provide great defaults, but allow overrides. That's going back to the scale without sprawl, right? Allowing that little bit of flexibility. And then you have the top layer. This is team specific stuff. And in my opinion, I think this is where you can get, let them have a little bit more freedom. If the mobile team wants to use obscure testing framework, who cares? Because you have a rock solid bottom layers. You have that foundation, you have the middle layer that providing those best practices and that little bit of flexibility. And then you have the top layer where it's team specific stuff. Don't try to standardize everything, but provide good defaults and a solid foundation to grow. And then phase three, right, is transforming your operational model for your platform team. And this is a big one, from reactive to proactive. This is where rubber meets the road. Start small, pick the friendliest team, their most painful problem, or maybe your most vocal critic, right? Solve their problem completely. Make them your champion. right? And here's the transformation path that actually works. First, stop taking tickets for things that should be self-service. Yes, that will cause short-term pain. We'll channel that pain into building the self-service capacity, like we saw with the IDP. Second, measure everything. Time to provision, ticket volume, developer satisfaction. You need data as a baseline to show this is working. And maybe measure everything is a little bit extreme, but you need to have enough that you have some sort of baseline for your understanding, right? How do you know that you're improving? How do you know the changes are working? Because not all changes are going to be the ones that you want, right? And then third, you want to celebrate your public wins. Sorry, you want to celebrate your wins publicly, right? When a developer provisions their own service in 2 minutes, make sure everyone knows. Once a team starts seeing other teams' success and their successfulness, right, they will soon want it for themselves. So let's do this poll, right? I know some of this might sound daunting, but what's your biggest barrier to implementing something like this? Is it getting buy-in from leadership, which I know sometimes that can be a headache and a half, finding time to migrate existing pipelines, convincing developers to adopt new standards, or is it the complexity concerns, right? Like, hey, maybe there's a large overhaul for us. Where are your concerns based? And this maybe help us to help inform the platform team to get a little bit better. I'm seeing a lot finding time to migrate existing pipelines. That's a huge one, right? We do have some nice automated tools to help with that, but it's always sometimes requires that manual intervention there. I'm seeing getting buy-in from leadership, understand that too. Not seeing anyone saying convincing developers to adopt. I guess you kind of drag them along with you. But all this platform team toolkit, right, is enabling developers, making sure they have a better developer experience. So maybe that one doesn't really make sense too much there. But finding time to migrate existing pipelines, I understand that concern a lot there. Sweet. Thank you so much for hopping in that pool there. Again, I think the leading one is finding time to migrate existing pipelines. Again, a big struggle there, especially when it comes to having so many pipelines. I think that's one of the key aspects, and it is going to be painful at first, but once you standardize things and once you pull everything into a centralized config approach and have that single source of truth, things become exponentially easier to implement and to innovate. When you have so many unique pipelines and so many things that sprawl all over, becomes a major problem. And sometimes it's harder to step back and actually implement that. I get that. So I know we're nearing the end of our presentation here in our time together, but I want to leave you with some key takeaways and then some resources as well. So I want to leave you with this, right? The false choice between control and velocity is killing your productivity. Every day you wait to implement something like this, your competitors who have figured out this are pulling further ahead. You don't need massive transformation. I know we're always so accustomed to boiling the whole ocean, redesigning everything, but all you need is 3 things. One brave team to start, pick that one team, that one champion that you want to make, one clear win to build that momentum. Once teams start seeing that momentum, they want the success for themselves, and 1 quarter of focus, of effort. And I know that last one might be hard, but it doesn't need to be a quarter. It could be a month. It could be a week. Whatever you need to do. One of our favorite things at CircleCI I like to do is to have our hackathons, which allow folks to spend a little extra time to work on these extra side projects here. And here's what we can do immediately, right? And I encourage everyone to do this. And I encourage everyone to do it this week, not someday, right? One is I want you audit your existing pipelines. And we talked about this. Look for those duplication patterns. I bet you will find the same security scanning step or the same way you want to do deployments, copy and paste it all over, right? Identify that. Then identify your highest impact, lowest effort standardization opportunity. Maybe it's that security scanning. Maybe it's environment provisioning. Find one thing that everyone does similarly, but not identically. And then talk to that one development team about the biggest CI/CD pain points. Not a survey, not a meeting with 20 people, one team, an actual conversation. Ask them what makes them want to throw their laptop out the window. What's their major pain points? And I guarantee with these 3 things, they might take 2 hours to do, right? Have a conversation, identify things. You don't need to get super detailed. At least take 2 hours to implement this, because if you give it 2 hours, right, you'll have everything you need to hopefully build your business case and take those immediate next steps. Now, I want to leave you with some things, right? One is going to be access to our platform team toolkits. That's going to include a technical deep dive, more than what I did here with my colleague Derry. He's an awesome engineer that dives into a lot more detail about every single possibility with the platform team toolkit. Second, I want to leave you with the full toolkit implementation as we showed off today. So the repo I showed off with the config policies, the templates, the policies, the orbs, the governance patterns, I'll give that all to y'all. And then lastly, I want to give you the opportunity to arrange a consultation to discuss your specific situation with us. A 30-minute session to dive deep into your situation and see how we could help. But before we go, and before we kind of launch into the Q&A with our remaining time, I want to hear from you. What's the number one takeaway from today? Our standards can be speed multipliers. Platform teams should be enabled, not gate. Self-service is key to scale. We need better developer experience, which is the next one. Or are you ready to eliminate the false choice picking between speed and velocity? Or sorry, speed and control. My bad there. Self-service is key. I'm seeing a lot of that, which is true, right? You're not going to enable the platform team toolkit without that self-service. Again, it doesn't need to be an IDP in front, and it can be many different things, but that is a huge one to start off with. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining. I am going to open it for the Q&A here. I know we have some leftover time, about maybe 10 minutes or so, or 5 minutes or so. Open up for Q&A. I know we had a couple questions come through as we went through the presentation, but I'm happy to answer any more or drill into any questions maybe I didn't get to during the presentation here. Don't be shy. Answer any questions. I'm happy to. And again, we always have that one-on-one session that y'all can sign up for if you want to take it into a little more deeper time there. I see a question. Do we give secrets to CircleCI or can we use Vault? Great question there. It's two different ways with CircleCI. Best practices, I would say, is store secrets in a dedicated tool like HashiCorp Vault or AWS Secret Manager. They are robust, right? Hey, you should be already centralizing your configs in a clear, awesome way. Anyways, that's things that automatically rotate, things that have APIs. But a lot of people utilize CircleCI is also built in Secret Manager as well. It's really a matter of preference and convenience. If, again, I had to follow kind of best practices, I would recommend Vault, but it's really the maturity of your organization and where you want to place that kind of risk there. Well, thank you for everyone joining. It was a pleasure to kind of present and get this opportunity to talk to y'all. And again, I encourage y'all to check out CircleCI, or if you want to have a conversation about your setup and deep dive, you always have that one-on-one consultation that you can sign up for. Thank y'all.